I think of our series title is When Answers Don't Come Easy, studying through, as you just heard, Ecclesiastes. And I love, even in Mary Jane with your story, it sounds like your family was a lot about getting answers and probably asking questions. I imagine those table times involved questions and answers. But it's interesting because as we've talked, and Adam shared this last week, there's questions that we ask where, as much as we'd love to say there's an easy answer, and to be honest, I think Christians are sometimes the worst at giving easy answers to hard questions. There's a lot of questions that don't have easy answers, and they don't come easy. I was thinking about this week, and I see it in Mary Jane's story. Questions come easy. Answers don't come easy, at least not good ones. Questions come easy, even in the story as she's gone through life and probably lived a life of questions in her house, around the table, at the newspaper, and then there's a suicide in her life. You can't help but ask questions, right? Questions come easy. The hard thing is the answers don't come very easy sometimes. At least not ones that seem to satisfy. We see this, and many of you experience this situation even with children at a young age. I've had 3 kids, and you have a child and they're growing up, they're being able to talk and move around, and all of a sudden another mom comes in with a big pregnant belly. I don't know, are there any of those in this room that are big? I won't ask if you need to expose that. So you've got a big pregnant belly, and those times where you're like telling your child, and you're like, okay, they're kind of wondering like what's sticking out of that person's stomach. Like they didn't look like that, 6 months ago. And often the comment to a young child would be something like, there's a baby in her belly. I don't know what belly actually means. I think of stomach. A baby's not in the stomach, but there's a baby in her belly. And then sometimes followed up by, one point you were in mommy's belly. And usually that's a satisfactory answer for a while, right? But as that child grows, let's say 3 years old, there's that moment they see another pregnant woman, and that question comes out. How did I get in mommy's belly? How did I get in mommy's belly? Natural question, right? Okay, I was in mommy's belly. That makes sense for a 2-year-old. I don't know. 3 years old. How did I get there? Simple question. At some degree, you could say the answer is easy, right? I mean, the answer is straightforward, scientific, biological, but you're talking to a 3-year-old. And that perspective of the 3-year-old makes the question hard to answer. I've been having fun with ChatGPT recently. Pretty amazing technology. And so I put a little question, a search in there. What would you say? What are common answers for, I decided, let's throw a Christian mom into a conversation with a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old when they ask the question, how did I get into mommy's belly? Now, hopefully your 18-year-old isn't asking the question that way, but it was so fascinating to hear some of the responses. Here was some of the responses for a Christian answering a 3-year-old that ChatGPT gave me. I'm not, just so you know, I'm not going to go into the 18-year-old one because it gets a little awkward. Number 1, God put you there because he knew we would love you so much. I know! Oh, is it true? Sure. But it satisfies, right? Number 2, mommy and daddy prayed for you, and God made you grow in mommy's belly. Again, you're talking to a 3-year-old. There's a degree that's true. You're just leaving some steps out in the middle. You were a special gift from God, and you started growing in mommy's tummy until you're ready to come out. 6-year-old answers. When mommy and daddy decided they wanted a baby, God helped you start growing in mommy's belly. A little bit more, for a 6-year-old, a little more, but not a lot there. Still some missing pieces. God has a wonderful way of making families. He made you inside mommy's tummy to be part of ours. maybe. This one I liked, 6-year-old. When a mom and a dad decide to have a baby, the dad gives a tiny seed to mom, and the seed helps the baby start growing in mommy's belly. At some degree, that's probably more right. But for a 6-year-old, when I think of like mommy gives daddy a seed, like I'm like, how did he plant it in there? There's more questions. We don't need to go there. So I went through, and it was so fascinating. I mean, you go through this whole thing. Here, I'll just read one of the 12-year-old. I think probably people are a little more descriptive than this nowadays. When a man and a woman love each other and want to have a baby, God uses that love to create new life. Your life started when a tiny part of daddy and a tiny part of mommy came together and you grew in mommy's belly. A little bit more. But so it's fascinating. And as I'm thinking about this, here's what struck me is that perspective shapes your questions. Perspective shapes your questions, right? I mean, a child's questions are shaped by their childlike perspective. But perspective also influences your answers, both on the one giving the answer, but also on how you receive an answer. Perspective is huge. After doing that search from, 3 years old, 6 years old, 12 years old, 18-year-old, I thought, I'm just going to see what ChatGPT has to say about how about 30 years old? How about 60 years old? How about 90 years old? And I'll tell you what was fascinating is as it moved from like that 18-year-old age into the 30s and the 60s and the 90s, it had so much less to do with biology. It had more to do with meaning, purpose in life. Why am I in this family? Why did God decide to create me? Why did I experience all the pain that I experienced? Wouldn't it have been better for me not to ever have been born with what I've done to others? Questions that are much deeper answers to that question of how did I get into mommy's belly? Because perspective changes the question. Perspective changes or influences the answer. Last week, Adam kicked off our series. We've got this graphic. You could throw it up there with the fist. When answers don't come easy, and what we've been talking about is in Ecclesiastes, Solomon, as we think to be the author, writes about what do you do as you're trying to grasp for meaning in life. And that there's so many things in life that we search for, that we think this is where I'm going to find purpose and meaning, and you think you've got it. You're right there. You've been working maybe for years to get it, and then all of a sudden it slips through your fingers. And you realize you're left with nothing. How do we deal with a life that feels like that in so many ways? One of the first passages Adam mentioned last week is chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. And in this passage, Solomon reveals his perspective. It says this, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. That word vanity is sometimes translated meaninglessness, vanity, futility. The word is a Hebrew word hevel, which means basically like smoke. It's mist. It's something that you can't get a hold of. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. What does man gain? What do I get from all my work, from all my toil at which I toil under the sun? Under the sun. This is the perspective that Solomon's coming with. When I look at the world under the sun, what I can see, what I can experience, what I can observe, what do I get for all my work? What's his conclusion? Mist, smoke, hevel, meaninglessness. That's what he concludes when he looks from his perspective. And remember that perspective shapes your questions. And perspective influences the answers. So as Solomon's going to journey through Ecclesiastes, what is the first question where the answer doesn't come easy that Solomon's going to dig into? Because we get to do it today. What's the first question? I love that this is his first one because it's almost as basic as it gets. It's foundational to life. It's one of those questions that you just can't help asking. And it's probably a question that brings more discouragement, more despair, more frustration, more hopelessness than any other question. I would guess that every single person in here has wrestled with this question at one point or another in their life, and I can't imagine there's not people right now who are wrestling with this question. Let's start in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 5. Solomon says this: "The sun rises and the sun goes down, and hastens back to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Round and round it goes. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again." This is going to be at the beginning of his first question with an answer that doesn't come easy. What is he talking about? Go ahead and go to the next slide there. He mentions three things multiple times. The first one is the sun. He says the sun rises and the sun goes down. It hastens back to the place where it rises again. Second thing he notices is the wind. The wind blows to the south, goes around to the north, round and round it goes the wind. On its circuits, the wind returns. The next one is water or streams. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. Sun, wind, water. Those are going to be the three observations that Solomon makes under the sun. What is his observation? Well, it's fascinating. Let's look at each of those just scientifically. I think of the first one, the sun. He talks about how the sun goes down and then it comes back up again, and it goes down and it comes back up again. Scientifically, for Solomon, it seems like there was more of an understanding of the sun moving, which was true at that age, but we understand it's actually not the sun that moves, right? It's the earth. It's the earth that moves, and the earth moves in a couple different ways, right? It goes around the sun, and that's where we end up with our seasons, because there's a certain tilt of the axis that is essential actually to life on earth, that there's a tilt so the equator is not constantly getting hit with the fullness of the sun, but as the seasons go, it creates a lot of different change in environment for plants and growth and animals and migration and all sorts of things as it circles around. But what Solomon's really talking about is more this daily change, right? This rotation. So we've got this orbit around the sun, but there's also a movement every day, 24 hours as this planet spins. Which is so fascinating, because if that didn't happen, or if it happened at a different pace, life, at least human life, would not be possible on this planet. That 24-hour rotation, and there's a little bit of a range that it could be, but is essential for life as we know it. If it was day too long in one place, you would burn up. If it was night too long in one place, you would freeze. Somehow in Frasier, we're going to be freezing tomorrow in the day. I don't know. But that's generally how it works. And if it wasn't for that, couldn't have life. The sun. How about the wind? We've got the wind. Wind is interesting. I grew up in Estes Park, which is a really windy town. I love Frasier because there's way less wind. Wind is so fascinating. The wind is regional, but it's also global. And wind, though you may not like wind, is essential, again, for life. You have to have wind. If you look globally, wind, the equator gets most of the heat, and as the air heats up, it elevates, it raises, that heat rises, which creates a vacuum underneath, sucking the cold air from the poles towards the center, towards the equator. While that sucks down, it creates a vacuum in the poles where it's cold, and that warm air cools and begins moving to the poles. And then it cools, it drops, creates another vacuum, and you have this cycle throughout this globe that's basically like an air conditioning unit for our whole world. If it didn't happen, we would have a stagnant air. It would be hot air staying down in the equator and cold air up top, but it actually moves constantly around. Not only that, but because of the orbit of the planet, it creates a movement in the winds and in the water that create a sideways movement. And so you've got this kind of north-south rotation, and you've also got a little bit of an east-west rotation, and those things together create the climate that we get to live in. Couldn't live without it. And then finally, he talks about water. And the water cycle was not scientifically invented by this time when Solomon wrote this book. But he recognizes this crazy reality that streams and rivers can flow into the sea, and yet as you watch the sea level, it doesn't rise. It just stays the same. How does that work? I remember thinking, how cool would it be to have a little stream, a little one of those like kind of constant streams in your backyard, and then you look at all the things you have to do to make that happen. You need a pool, and then you need a pump, and the pump has to have electricity, and then you have pipes that go up, and in order to get a constant flow, there's a lot of work. It's like, yeah, it's not worth that, especially in a cold climate. It only works like 3 months out of the year. How amazing that God created this world in such a way he doesn't need pumps to do what we can do with a pump. It just happens. As water's evaporated into the atmosphere, and those winds, because of the rotation, moves that water to the poles or to other places that are colder. It falls potentially in snow or ice or rain, and then that gathers, the snow gathers, and thankfully, because of the seasons, that snow eventually melts and comes into runoff so it can keep running down into the sea, but the sea doesn't fill because it's going to evaporate up again. I mean, this is beautiful stuff, right? Mary Jane even mentioned God's natural creation, general revelation, shows God's character. But remember, perspective influences questions, and perspective influences answers. Solomon, in his perspective, what do I get for all my work in this ridiculous world I live in? Under the sun, what do I get? What's in it for me? What do I get for my toil? That's his perspective. Under the sun, what can I see? And you know what he takes? This beautiful picture of creation? It's not beautiful to him. It's actually extremely discouraging. Let's look at verse 4 and verse 11. Here's what he says, verse 4. He says, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Yeah, the earth keeps going. It remains, but not us. We come, we live, we die. We come, we live, we die. We come, we live, we die. It just goes on and on and on. Verse 11, he says, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to come among those who come after. NIV translation translates verse 11 this way. It says, no one remembers the former generations. It takes things and pairs it to verse 4. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Again, Solomon looks at the world and he says, wow, it's so stable. It's so here. It's so eternal in his mind under the sun. But not us. It was interesting. I looked up, the Ancestry.com did a study of families. They found that 95% of Americans can name both parents. Makes sense? Makes sense why there's some who couldn't. 47% of Americans, that's less than half, can name all 4 grandparents. 4% of Americans can name all 8 great-grandparents. Only 21% can name even one. Less than 1% of Americans can name all 16 great-great-grandparents. Now you might say, I don't know any of my great-great-grandparents' parents. The reality is that's not that long ago. Globally speaking, when you think of world history. And I think Solomon's recognizing this, and he's like, in this world we live, we think we're so important. We have so much identity wrapped around what we do and who we are. In America, less than half of you will be forgotten. According to this statistic, it's probably different regionally, but less than half of you, or more than half of you, will be forgotten by your grandkids. It's not very far. Great-grandkids, 96% of you will not be remembered. Great-great-grandkids, Probably won't have any idea who you are. Insignificant to the generations. That's your family. I think Solomon's seeing this and he looks at the world. It's like the world lasts, but I don't. We don't. But I think he also sees not just the parallel or the contrast to the world, but he also sees a parallel. Look at verse 8. He says this, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with hearing, with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. In other words, he's saying there's nothing satisfied as this word, like eating or drinking and being like satisfied. He's like, the eyes can't eat and drink enough. They always want more. And the ears never get filled. What does that sound like? The oceans. Never fills. Use the same word. And then he goes on. What has been will be again. And what has been done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. What does that sound like? The wind. Is there anything of which it is said this is new? Nope. It's already been in the ages before. Just like the sun, it's not new. It just goes and goes and goes and goes. Just like your life, it goes and goes. You wake up, you work, you sleep. You wake up, you work, you sleep until you die. And then someone takes your place and they wake up, they go, they sleep, they wake up. And it just goes on and on and on. It's discouraging. So as Solomon's looking at this world, what does his perspective do to shape how he sees things? And what is the answer? Because I think if we're honest with ourselves, this is a reality, the seemingly insignificance of our lives. We don't like to think about it. We don't like to explore it. We maybe ask the question, hey, am I meaningful? Do I have significance? Is the job I'm doing, the work I'm doing, what I'm doing with my kids, what I'm doing with this nonprofit, whatever it might be, we ask like, hey, is this good? Should I be doing it? But we kind of like check ourselves at really answering the question. We don't want to go too far into that for fear that we find out you actually don't change anything. The world stays the same. You're helping the poor. That's awesome. Poverty still exists. In fact, sometimes it seems like it gets worse. You're educating your kids. You're teaching them about Jesus. And then they run off and they don't even follow the Lord. What did I do? Was it worth it? Am I insignificant? Did I do it wrong? You work a job and then you find out that the job you're working is actually hurting people. Like, man, what did I waste my time doing? Do I have purpose? Does it mean the question comes easy? Am I important? Do I have significance? Do I really matter to anyone? Does all my work and energy even make a difference in this world that doesn't seem to care a lick about me? It just goes on and on and on. Do I make a lasting difference? I think it's a key question. It's a question that is easy to ask, hard to answer. I was in Portland, Oregon a number of years ago with my brother who lives there. And we were down at a place called Burnside Skate Park, which is kind of this concrete skate park under the Burnside Bridge. And it's a place you don't go at certain times during the day. Even the cops don't show up there because it's not a very safe place to be. And we're there during the daytime, which was a safer time to be there, just watching these just incredibly hardcore skaters skate in this massive concrete skate park. A lot of the concrete skate parks, like the one in Winter Park, are kind of designed after the Burnside Skate Park. And so we're there and we're watching and you're seeing these guys just going and it was incredible. My brother said, hey, it's interesting. A few days ago, there was a guy who's kind of a regular here and he started skating. He dropped in and he's, doing some tricks off of the bank and hitting stuff. And he was just like landing everything. Just like, every trick he tried, he was just, nailing it. And people started noticing as he's just, hitting tricks that he normally wouldn't do. He was just in the groove. He was on it. And everybody starts like banging their skateboards, decks on the sides of the ramps. And like, whoa. And they're watching him and he's going and going and going. He did one last trick, popped off, went up to the top of this. There's this huge drop in. That's, I don't know if it was like 15, 20 feet off the ground. You drop in to hit something big and he goes up top and everybody's just like, oh my goodness. He's going to drop that, and what is he going to do? Because he is just having the most amazing skate session of his life. And he stands up there, he throws his deck, and he dives off headfirst into the concrete. He didn't die. And some of the people asked him when he came back to and went through the hospital, and they said, what were you thinking? You had the most amazing session of your life, skate session. That was amazing. What were you thinking? And he said, I realized in that moment that life would not get any better than that. Everybody was cheering me on. I landed every trick I wanted to land. If I end it now, I don't have to go back to the hurt and the pain and the insignificance of everyday life. Again, that's maybe an extreme example, but we find ourselves there. There are people in Greene County who live in that space. What's the answer? Solomon is going to answer really all of his questions with one answer. And it may not be the answer we want to hear, but in the end of the book, as was mentioned last week by Adam, he says this. Go ahead to chapter 12, verse 13. He says, the end of the matter. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. And he gives this simple answer to Solomon's questions. He says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Fear God and keep his commandments. Now, I don't know about you. Some of us are a little too used to you can't question the Bible. You can't get upset at the Bible. You just have to say, oh, that sounds nice. It does not sound nice. To me, it sounds extremely cold, extremely impersonal. If I was dealing with somebody who is wrestling with, do I have purpose in this life? Am I significant to anybody? I don't think the first words that would come out of my mouth is you need to fear God and you need to do what he asked you to do. Obey his commandments. It just doesn't feel encouraging. It doesn't feel like it really meets the need. It feels cold. It feels impersonal. The interesting thing, though, that doesn't make it not true. I was thinking about that idea of conception we talked about at the beginning. The true answer to how did I get into mommy's belly, a sperm connecting with an egg and the cells dividing and forming a child, it sounds cold. It sounds impersonal. I would rather have mommy and daddy loved each other so much that God decided to put you in my belly. That sounds good. You guys even all went, aw. Nobody said, aw, when I talk about sperm and eggs. No, you don't do that in church. We could get more detailed, but we're not going to. It sounds cold. It sounds impersonal, and yet it's true. Not only that, the more you understand the biology, you actually realize it's not cold and it's not impersonal. I mean, out of all the ways God could have designed the sperm to get into the egg, and there's different ways at some degree within the animal kingdom, out of all the ways, he could have chosen a lot different ways than he chose that don't provide pleasure, intimacy, connection. And yet he chose a way that is nothing cold, at least in its correct and right way. I was thinking about that idea of intimacy. Compared to all the other animals in the animal kingdom, there is an intimacy, a connectedness that happens with humanity, with humans, in that process of conception that no other animal has it in the same degree. It's relational. Even though it seems cold, it's not cold. And then you get into things that biology can't explain. How is personality created? How does spiritual desire happen? And the ability to commune with God. It's not impersonal, it's very personal. even though the truth seems more cold than mommy and daddy loved each other and God put you in our belly. You see, perspective makes a difference. I think as Solomon is looking at this statement, fear God and obey his commandments, his perspective is not cold or impersonal at all. We're going to have to go through this quickly, but I want to walk through briefly when it comes to your significance, these two ideas: fear God, obey his commands, or keep his commands. Fear God, that's a weird phrase. What does it mean to fear God? I think all of us, when we were younger, if you grew up in the church, like, what is it? Am I supposed to be afraid? Is it trembling? Is it, how does fear God mean? And yes, there's some passages that talk about fear, talk about trembling, but there's some passages that are much warmer than that. Look at these. Proverbs 8:13. It says, the fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Interesting. Pride and arrogance in the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. God says, I hate when people hurt people. I hate when there's pride and arrogance. And if you fear the Lord, then that's how you're going to act, hating evil. So something about the fear of the Lord has to do with wanting to imitate or be like God. Does that fit into your definition of fear of the Lord? Psalm 118. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, this is actually 130. They got switched. We'll hit 130. Adam used this passage last 2 weeks ago. If you, O Lord, should mark my iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? In other words, God, if you kept track of all my sins, Adam mentioned that, how could we stand? None of us could. But I love this. Look what it says. But with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. I don't normally think about fearing the one who forgives me. And so your definition of fear, it better somehow include imitation of God, and it better somehow include recognizing God's incredible forgiveness of your sins, even though you don't deserve it. Your definition of fear has to include that, because that's what it says it's for. Psalm 118, it says, let those who fear the Lord say his steadfast love endures forever. Again, your definition of fear has to include recognizing God's unfailing love for you. So I don't know what fear the Lord means to you, but maybe we all need to expand that a little bit. Often we talk about, well, it's an awe of the Lord. That misses me too. I like to think about it as like recognizing God is awesome, which is kind of the same thing. Or being amazed at who he is. And amazement can come with trembling, but amazement also comes with recognizing his love and his grace and his mercy and his compassion. And so God, he's saying, you want to know your identity? Get amazed at the God who made you. And then he goes on from there to the second one, keep his commandments. Well, that also sounds cold and impersonal. But look at what Deuteronomy 10:12-13 says. This is in the section that are often understood as part of giving the commandments. It says, and now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But that you fear the Lord your God, there it is, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today. What does it say? For your good. The commands are for your good. He's like, I put things together to help you. They're for your good. If an adult is with a child and says to the child, hey, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Doesn't make any difference to me. That adult is not conveying significance upon the child. He's conveying lack of significance. If a parent takes a child into a dangerous situation and says to the child, hey, do whatever you want. I'm just going to go hang out over here. I'm not paying attention. You can do what you want. You just go around wherever you want to go. I'll be over here. I'll come get you later. That parent is not conveying significance to the child. The parent is conveying insignificance, meaninglessness to the child. I don't care what you do, even if the child might feel free. The child does not receive significance. Significance from a parent to the child is when a parent says, I am wise, I understand the context, and I have a really good plan for you. And so here's how I want you to live because this is the best thing for you. That child may not feel like that's significance, but what that parent is saying is, I care about you. You have purpose. And so when Solomon ends this by saying, fear God, be amazed at God, and obey his commandments, it's not cold or impersonal. It's incredibly relational. It's saying he's got a plan and a desire for your life. And if you live that way, it works. One last illustration to close our time. Some of you guys have heard me teach before. I love gloves for an illustration. They're so good. It fits in your pocket. It's right here. If this glove was feeling insignificant, I don't know if I have any meaning. I don't know what I've been doing. I've just been sitting around in the glove box. And somebody, a different glove has kind of taken my place as the number one glove, whatever. If this glove was lacking meaning, what do you do to help it? Oh, you're a really nice looking glove. You're looking better every day, even if it's not true. Oh, but you're better than those other gloves. You might not think you're significant, but compared to those other gloves, you're really significant. Or, hey, you know what? Have you ever tried being a dish rag? Because you'd make a pretty good dish rag. Add a little water, add a little soap. You could probably clean something. You're meaningful. You have significance. We could heap and pile encouragements on that glove to let him know that he's significant. And he might feel good for a little while. But I don't think that's the deepest way in which to give significance to this glove. And to be honest, I think heaping encouragements and ideas of how good everybody is and how everybody's got a purpose and, your mom and dad love you. Is it true? Yes. Is it encouraging? I hope so. But I actually don't think that's where we're supposed to find our significance. How do I let this glove know that he's significant? I said, do you know who made you? Do you know the designer of you? He's awesome. He's awesome. But not just that. I don't just stop there. It's not just God loves you. God has a plan for you. God designed you. That's part of it. There's a significance in that. But how else do I let this glove know he's significant? Let me show you. Let me show you how significant you are. And you put the glove on. And you do the things you do as a hand with the glove. And all of a sudden the glove realizes, I have purpose. Not in myself. My purpose, and it was this, Mary Jane mentioned this, my purpose is not given to myself. I don't build up purpose in myself. I was born with purpose, but that purpose cannot be separated by the fact that the significant God was the one who was designed to live in you and to use you and to work through you. And it's not your business what the hand decides to do with the glove. Significance is not about how much you do, how many people you reach, how many Bible verses you learn, how many people came to Christ through you, what kind of ministry or job or work you do. That doesn't affect significance. What is key to significance is, am I available to the one who is significant? And if I am, it doesn't matter what I do. My life is significant because the significant God who I fear, who I'm amazed at, lives in me. That's what happened when Adam fell. He lost the thing that made him the most significant. And that's what Christ came back to give us. Purpose, meaning, life, significance. Raised from the dead, gave us his spirit to live in us for whatever he wants to do. Which might be just to hang out and listen to worship or listen to something or watch your kids or work something or share your faith. There's a list of things that could mean. That's where significance comes from. And as you change your perspective, because remember, perspective shapes your questions and perspective influences the answer. As you begin looking at life with a change of perspective, I'm not looking for how do I create significance. I have significance as I'm available to the Lord It changes the questions you ask, and it changes the answer God gives. Fear God. Obey his commands. Be amazed at God and do what he wants to do through your life. I love Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. The last half says this: Christ in you is your hope of glory. Christ in you is your hope of glory. And I think when we're looking at Solomon and significance, I think you could fairly say Christ in you is also your true hope of significance. It's where real purpose comes. Whatever that looks like, we're all different. We all have a different role. What a gift. I'm going to pray. And sorry, I'm sure we've gone long. But we've got communion up here. And as you take communion, if you're a believer in Christ, we just all walk up front when you want as the music's playing, and you're going to grab a cup, grab the bread, representing the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. But what we're doing is we're remembering that he came to deal with partially our significance issue, that we have meaning. Because we do not have the kind of significance he designed us with unless we have his life in us. And so he came to die and to be buried and to be resurrected so that he could give us spiritual life. So as you take communion, remember that and celebrate your significance, which is only in Christ Jesus. Lord, thank you for the reality, the hard questions and the even harder answers that we see in life. And I think of this foundational question of significance, purpose, meaning. Lord, and I thank you that Solomon didn't just throw a bunch of really nice compliments in there, but he gave what we need. Lord, that we would be amazed at you and that we'd recognize that you have plans, that you have things you want to do in and through us, and we want to be obedient to those. Lord, we thank you for your death, for your burial, for your resurrection, for your indwelling spirit. In your name, amen.